So welcome back YouTube. In this video, I'll be showing you 6 tips. I think it's 5 tips. I don't know. I'll be showing you tips on how and the best way to layer your cakes so it doesn't fall on delivery, so you get a perfect and smooth and straight cake when trimming. So do well to subscribe if you are new to the channel. My name is Ekumedoka Daniel. Yeah, if you aren't, welcome back. So let's go. So welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be showing you basically how to layer your cake, the basic steps to follow, things to remember, things not to do when layering your cakes. So with me on my table, I have 2 layers of vanilla, 2 layers of chocolate, and 2 layers of red velvet. I don't know if you can see it with this camera. And I have an empty pan to put the cake crumbs, the offcuts, and I have my bowl of buttercream. I have my trimming knife. I have my palette knife and a couple of scrapers. By the way, yeah, if you have not watched the video I made on the basic tools you need on decorating your cake, I think I'll put a link in the description and maybe a card up there, so you can just quickly go and watch it so you know the basic tools you need in decorating your cake. I've explained a couple. So with me, I also have my turntable and a cake board. So starting off, the first thing you should have in mind, or that should come to your mind is your strongest layers of cake should be at the base. You should start with your strongest layers of cake. Why is it that? Why should you do that? Basically, when building a house, you lay a foundation. That should be your foundation. Yeah. So I think I'll start with this. So by the way, there's a trash can just beside me here. So yeah. So your first tip, tip number 1, start with your strongest layers of cake. Why? Because you need to really have a solid foundation. So tip number 2, make sure you always have a flat surface or something like a flat surface before you put it on that cake layer on top. You get? As make sure your already existing cake or the already existing layer is flat. It's quite basic, just make sure you have a flat layer. So I'm making sure this layer is flat. This is flat. It doesn't necessarily have to be like straight flat. It could be angulated. Is it angulated? Just make sure it's flat. So tip number 3, make sure you add buttercream in between every layer. Why should you do that? Buttercream has 2 purposes here. Firstly, it is a buttercream cake, so you should have buttercream layer. And secondly, it helps in holding your cakes together. It helps in like just keeping your cakes in place. Do you get? That's 2 purposes. Firstly, it helps in holding your cakes together, and secondly, it helps in keeping your cakes in place. So this is my chocolate layer. So by the way, I'll be leaving links in the descriptions on how I bake my cakes. I have a couple of flavors, so as soon as I'm doing that, I'll just be updating all the links on the description on how to bake perfect flavors of cakes. As at the time I'm doing this video, I don't think I've made any video yet. So yeah, make sure your layers are leveled at all times. I think that's tip number 3, right? Make sure you always put buttercream in between your layers. Now tip number 4. Make sure you put every cake at the center of the whole how do I put this? Make sure every cake is in the center. Like, it should not be like an inch off this, or an inch off this, or an inch in the front, or an inch in the back. Just make sure it's in the middle at all times, possible middle, the best middle. While you are making sure is leveled, you get, make sure it's in the middle at all times. Okay. Tip number 5, in leveling your cakes, be careful with your chocolate cakes, or with your chocolate layers. I think the chocolate layers are quite, it has more, less, it's softer than the other cakes, I guess. So, tip number 5, be careful with your chocolate layers. Just be careful with them. Tip number 6, always wash your hand. I think that should be tip number 1. Always wash your hand before you handle any cake. I washed my hand before I touched this cake, so that should be like tip number 1. Always wash your hands. Always wash your hands. Always, like, your hands should be always clean. Tip number 7, make sure you always cross-check your cake and look around your cake and make sure it's aligned and it's standing up straight. It should not be bending to one side, because like that will be like the end of you. Make sure your cake is, oh my God, forgot to add buttercream. So I think we're done. Yep. So, having a recap. So your tip number 1 should be start with your hardest layers and end with your hardest layer. Your tip number 2 should be always have a leveled cake before you add on that layer. Your tip number 3 should be, always add buttercream to your cakes before you add on that layer. Then your tip number 4, what's your tip number 4? Can somebody remind me in the comment box? I think tip number 5 is always wash your hands. That should be our tip number 1, but then it's coming out now as number 5. Then number 6 is make sure your cake is standing upright at all times. Because if your cake isn't standing upright at all times, it's going to give you issues at the long run. So I think we've come to the end of this video. Thank you guys for watching. I'll be making a video on how to trim your cake and things to do when trimming your cake and how to get a perfect and straight cake when trimming. So see you next time.